Our text this evening is one verse, John 19, verse 30. And when he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." And with that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. The seventh and final word of Jesus on the cross. Matthew and Mark tell us that Jesus cried out in a loud voice, and then he gave up his spirit. But only John tells us what he said when he yelled out in a loud voice. It is finished. And I'm sure all who heard it understood those words in different ways. No doubt John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, thought perhaps that Israel's messianic hope was finished. Israel had waited 2,000 years for Messiah, and certainly Jesus was that Messiah. He taught the people, he commanded large crowds, he healed the sick, he raised the dead, he did everything a Messiah is supposed to do. But now he's gone, having never done what we thought he came to do. Maybe, just maybe, God was not true to his promises after all. Mary, the mother of Jesus, she understood that her son was finished. The little baby that she cradled in her arms was brutally murdered by her own people. And at that moment, I'm sure her heart burst. And yet I wonder too if at the same moment an anger swelled up within her that was hard to contain. An anger not born in grief, but born in broken promises. She had seen the angel, heard his promise. It was her son who was to rule Israel. God had promised her that, but evidently God was not true to his promises after all. Peter, too, is likely certain that the words of Jesus were meant just for him. Peter understood that his entire life was just finished. I mean, Peter, you were the head of the apostles. Certainly you would have ruled at his right hand in his kingdom. And then the one good thing that happened in your life, you blew it. At the most critical moment, I panicked under pressure, and I left him alone. I guess it doesn't really matter anymore, though, because there will be no kingdom, no king. God's plan, if he surely has a plan, is not going to include me, after all. Even if God is true to his promises, I'm sure he won't want me to be part of them after what I've done. And after thinking about those who experienced the first Good Friday, I wonder, are we any different than they are? Do our lives really reflect the glory of his reign? Or have we been disillusioned by his lordship as well? If God is sovereign on his throne, why do I suffer? If he is the king of all creation, why does my life reflect one disaster after another? If he really loves me, why is everything so hard? Even if he loves me, would he continue to love me after everything I've done? At times we all wonder, can the execution of one man 2,000 years ago really matter today? And I think the answer to that question really depends on what we mean when Jesus said, "It is finished." Were those the words and the gasps of a dying man? Was it a statement of failure by someone who claimed to be God? Or was it something else altogether? Certainly we know from the text that Jesus' life was finished. The text tells us that after he said these words, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. We know too that his suffering was finished. The gruesome events of the last 12 to 18 hours are beyond our ability to comprehend, nor do we want to. And they finally came to an end. In death came sweet relief. The Old Testament ceremonial laws were now finished. After he died, the curtain in the temple was torn in two. No longer did the high priest need to enter the Holy of Holies to make atonement for himself or his people. Hebrews 7:27 tells us this. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of his people. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself. But I don't think any of those are what Jesus had in mind when he voiced his words from the cross that day. It is finished is not so much words that describe something that has ended, but rather something that has been accomplished. And it is what he accomplished on the cross that makes the difference for us today. The first thing he accomplished on the cross is that he revealed to us the heart of the Father. During his time here on earth, he revealed over and over to the disciples what the Father was like. Through his life, through his teaching, through his miracles, the disciples came to know who the Father was. That's why Jesus said to Philip in John 14, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. But on the cross, Jesus reveals as nowhere else the heart of God the Father. That God should propose such a horrible punishment for his Son in order to remove the burden of sin from us all tells us, as nothing ever could, how much our sins matter to God and how much he loves us. The cross, more than anything else, clearly reveals the pervasive nature of our sin. For if we were not hopelessly lost in our sin, God would never have required so much of his Son. No event in all of history so clearly demonstrates the love of God or his holiness. The second thing that Jesus accomplished on the cross was victory over the power of sin. A sin so great requires a sacrifice even greater. For the love of God was such that he placed on his Son the curse of the law that was due us. Jeremiah 11 says, so I brought on them all the curses of the covenant that I commanded them to follow, but they did not keep. Jeremiah is talking about us. Every one of us are covenant breakers. But the love of God revealed on Calvary was such that he removed the guilt from us and laid it upon his Son forever. Forevermore, the burden of sin is gone. It doesn't matter what sin we have committed. Jesus on the cross did away with the punishment due you and I, pardoned, set free for all eternity. Hebrews 9 verse 6. Now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself. Finally, on the cross, Jesus accomplished forever the redemption of God's world. In the Greek, that phrase, it is finished, is only one word, tetelestai. It's a word that implies that something's over or finished. But what it really conveys is this idea of something is paid in full. In Jesus' day, that one word was often stamped on a bill of sale when an item had been paid for in full. Papyrus receipts for taxes have been recovered with the word tetelestai written across them, paid in full. The penalty for all of sin, not just our sin, but the penalty for all sin had been paid for in full. You see, the pervasive nature of sin is that it affects everything in God's creation. There's nothing that we see around us that has not been infected by sin. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life." That word there that John uses for world doesn't refer specifically to people. It's not a statement that some purport that this means God saves everybody. The word that John uses here for world is the word cosmos. God so loved His cosmos. God loved all of His creation so much that He sent His one and only Son. Jesus on the cross didn't just die for our sins. He died for the sin of all His creation. He died to finally put an end to the ravages of acid rain destroying His mountain forests. He died to put an end to the pollution that fills our oceans. He died to destroy cancer and pain and suffering. He died not just to redeem man, but He died to redeem His whole creation. And He accomplished that on the cross. He finished it. In fact, Hebrews 10:12 tells us, "But when this priest, that is Jesus, had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, He sat down at the right hand of God." The priests never sat down because their work was never done. But Jesus sat down because His work of redemption was finished. Long ago, God created the world to be a perfect place where He could live with His people forever. But the awfulness of sin created a barrier between us and God. But in the cross, we see that God finishes what He began. He revealed to us again His loving heart. He removed the guilt of our sin, and He redeems the world from the ravages of sin. And when we come to Christ on the cross, we begin a life that God will bring to completion. What He began in us, He will finish. And nothing could be more relevant to us today than the cross. Let's celebrate the cross this evening. We're going to partake of the Lord's Supper. And we're going to do it very casually tonight. I'm going to invite Jeff just to come forward and pass out the elements. And as you receive the element, feel free to eat it. Feel free to drink it. Don't wait for everyone. In your own time, think of what Jesus accomplished that day. Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not that my Lord was crucified, knowing not that it was for me He died on Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary.